不是英雄，不读三国。若是英雄，怎么能不懂寂寞？独自走下长坂坡，月光太温柔，曹操不肯说。All right, guys. Hey everyone, what's going on? This is Mark from SolarGames, and today we're going to spend a little time talking about the lore of what is soon to be my favorite set of Grand Archive forever. Mortal Ambition. Now, Mortal Ambitions is a set that's going to be dropping in October 11th. So it's not released yet, but this set is heavily based on Sanguo, or Three Kingdoms, for a really famous period of Chinese history. Some of you guys may know already, I'm a big fan of Sanguo era, like everything, right? So like ever since I was a little kid, I was watching the TV show since I was like 9. I read parts of the book. By the way, the book is too dense for me. It's not something I enjoy, but I've watched multiple versions and iterations of the TV show. I've read a bunch of things online. I played Dynasty Warriors, and then I played like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is the more strategic version of the games. If you're really down to that, think like Total War, but way less graphical combat. It's more just like literally resource management all the way through, right? But a lot of intrigue. You sent you get like spying, bribing, all that stuff, right? So these are the two main sets of games I played, and tons of other like just references in general of Three Kingdoms. So yeah, so honestly, it's one of my favorite things. And if you know about like Magic the Gathering, right? Magic the Gathering actually had a Three Kingdoms set, which very few cards were actually ever printed in English. So the English set is something that a lot of people do collect. But of course, the English version is hard to get. They were only made available in, I think, Australia for whatever reason. I don't know why they didn't bring it to America. So of course, when Grand Archive announced that they're going to be bringing Sanguo into their game, I'm like, holy shit! Can I just express? I can't physically express how excited I am about this, right? I remember back at like the World's release announcement over at Las Vegas, when Grand Archive showed off some of the art images. And then I didn't really notice it back then, but I think like Roger hinted something at me or something about like this set being Sanguo. And I remembered there was a knife, like there's a blade, kind of like hidden behind a bunch of pictures. That was Guan Yu's blade, right? So the famous like dragon crescent blade, right? Of course, then they later released like Kong Ming, which is a very famous character from Sanguo, right? Zhuge Liang, Zhuge Kongming. And so from there on, basically all these like different spoilers came out, and I figured today, after a bunch of spoilers just dropped, and right before a lot of more spoilers are going to be released for the entire community, that I would do my own version of the lore video. Sorry for that super long intro, but I just felt like it's something I'm so passionate about. I want to give you the background and kind of like what I know about it, okay? So for full reference, I do speak Chinese. I guess I'm fairly cultured in Chinese, so this is like something I'm really, I guess, passionate about. So let's get started. For our video today, I'm just going to start slow, and we're going to do about like 5 cards or so. We'll see how much time that takes. I'm going to give you some of the deep lore of the cards that have already been spoiled, and we're not going to focus on the card mechanic or anything like that. We're just going to talk about the artwork. We're going to talk about the storyline behind it so that it kind of catches you up on what's going on. Now, what I'm going to give you, of course, is the Three Kingdoms story. It's not the story from Grand Archive. It could totally be different, but from the way the artwork looks, at the very minimum, it is a high reference or close reference to what happened in the story. So it should still be really relevant. So the first topic we're going to be talking about today is going to be about the color code. So not any specific card, but really all of the cards, right? So one thing that I noticed, especially when I saw a lot more cards, is that the color coordination of the different factions of Three Kingdoms and how they actually map to the Three Kingdoms in the story in Grand Archive is going to be like this. Green is the representation of Shu. So this is the province that's kind of like if you think about Three Kingdoms as China divided into 3 sections. Wei is the northern part, Wu is the southeast, and then Shu is the southwest. So this is southwest, more towards like jungles. If you think about modern day, it's more like Sichuan. Okay, for people who don't know where those places are, you know how like the spicy foods that's in China, they're really famous for, Chongqing and Sichuan? That's where shu is. So you remember spicy foods, okay? Shu, okay? All right, cool. And then wu, for the reference, right, of the southeast, think like Shanghai. Think like basically like Guangdong, like Canton, Shanghai, that area. That's going to be wu. That's like, water, think a lot of like seafood type of thing. That's wu. And then wei is what you consider like really Han Chinese. So like if you think about dumplings, right? Noodles, bread, like different types of bread that you like bake and shit, that would be northern China, wei. Okay, so just how food links with Sangguo, links with location. Okay, so shu is going to be very green. So any color green is going to be shu. And wu is going to be Wu is a little bit interesting. Wu looks to be, so far, missing from the story, okay? So I don't know what's going on, but apparently there is no Wu representation so far. Now, I could be missing some of the representations, I could be missing some of the references, but so far I have not seen any like obvious Wu characters yet. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be in the story, it just means that I haven't seen them yet. So blue or purple is completely contributed for Wei, right? So that's the kingdom in north. So think like Cao Cao is Wei, Xiahou like this is other like Wei generals that are very popular, famous, and then the Zhang Liao. These are like really cool generals of like the Wei kingdom, right? And then red color so far, what we see is kind of like what I would call or consider other. In this case, think about like maybe Liu Bu's faction is other, right? Diao Chan is other. Dong Zhuo would be other. So they're represented by red so far. There's a couple other people so far that have been red, and I'm just like thinking, who are they, right? Namely, it's going to be, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the video, but Imperial Seal features an artwork of somebody in red. But who is this person? It's not very clear so far, right? So I have some guesses, again, with some help from my Taiwan friends. Big ups to you guys in Taiwan. Hey, 谢谢. Everybody. Okay, so that's so far. And then what it looks to be norm or like kind of like, I don't know, colorless or whatever, it looks to be yellow turbans. So yellow turbans seems to be actually fairly represented in this story so far. Blue, very solidly Wei. Green, very solidly Shu. And then red is like other or Liu Bu's faction. And then gray or norm is going to be like yellow turbans, okay? And speaking of yellow turbans, pretty sure, and this is kind of like a guess, again, big ups and thank you to my friends in Taiwan. Zhang Jiao or Zhang Jue is very likely the character that's represented in the artwork of Cure the Flesh. So if you look at Cure the Flesh, you have a priest-looking person, kind of like blessing the poor. And if you read the flavor text on the card, it talks about like yellow turbans, helping the sick and stuff like that. And so essentially this is what's happening, right? When the court of Han was in a mess. So this is like the end of the Han dynasty, right? Everyone's starving. The whole population is like really, it's famine, it's illness, all that stuff, right? There was a rebellion. So the Yellow Turbans basically were the people's army. They represented like what they called, hey, the mandate of heaven was already disrupted. So they were representing, I think, the will of heaven is essentially the point. And they're saying, we're here to help cure the sick, heal the people, heal the population, right? And get everybody kind of like, more into a better state. So they were like, in essence, helping everybody, the people who were being neglected and ignored. And that's why they gained popularity so much, and that's why they had such a large army, because the peasants who they helped essentially would say, okay, well, I'll just fight for the Yellow Turbans, right? It became a part of the rebellion, essentially. So the idea here is Zhang Jiao, or Zhang Jue, if you're talking about like older Chinese pronunciation of this character, this Chinese character, very likely it's Zhang Jue, is actually the leader of the Yellow Turban, right? So if you think like, all the Dynasty Warrior games, and especially in the beginning levels where you're fighting all the Yellow Turbans, this guy is the big boss of the Yellow Turbans, right? So you fight him at the end of the first arc of the story. Okay, so that's that card. Moving on to the next card, Fairy Whisper. So fairly sure, this is not, again, it's not confirmed, but I'm pretty sure the character that's represented in Fairy Whisper is Liu Bei, okay? For a couple reasons. Number one, if you remember, I said green is the faction of Shu. Liu Bei is the leader of the Shu kingdom, right? And if you think about it, that picture, right, of the card that we spoiled on Talk GA, Liu Bei is standing with Cao Cao and then they're looking down on Liu Bu, who they just defeated. So that is another key indicator that it's probably Liu Bei. A third key is actually in the card Mandate of Honor. If you look at the artwork for Mandate of Honor, who's kind of like talking to each other? It's Liu Bei and Cao Cao, right? And in the story, there's a very famous scene where very early on, this is before Liu Bei even has an army and Cao Cao's kind of just starting out, nobody's really that powerful. The two of them did have a chance to go sit down and talk about the current day's heroes, right? And they would say like, oh, who do you think? So Cao Cao started a conversation and they're drinking, having fun, whatever. But this is a very tense conversation because Cao Cao basically said, who do you think is, the heroes of today? And this is before like even three kingdoms. There was many, many, many kingdoms. And then everyone had like a bunch of like, different lords and kings that kind of rule different sections of China right now. Even though they all serve the Han Emperor, nobody really actually like respected the emperor because his power is basically, non-existent at this point. So they would discuss who the heroes are or who the faction leaders are. But Cao Cao famously said during this conversation that he thinks that the heroes of today is just you and me. You, Liu Bei, and me, Cao Cao. Which basically is saying very clearly, hey, we're going to have to fight eventually, and we're going to figure this out, life or death, who's going to win and who's going to take over China, type of thing. So Mandate of Honor, if you think about it as a card, very flavorful. They're having a conversation, and they're having some sort of agreement, which is like, hey, nobody like does anything crazy. It's kind of like they're having this like last conversation of like some peace treaty that possibly could be tenuous, but exists so that they didn't have to go to war with each other and then cause a bunch of like problems for the people, right, of the China. So that's why Fairy Whispers, going back to that picture again, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Liu Bei. That's the character of Liu Bei in the Grand Archive rendition of this universe. Okay, moving on to Favorable Winds. Another card that I really like because I think it's very, very, very flavorful. If you look at the artwork for Favorable Winds, basically it features like Zhuge Liang, right, Kong Ming, kind of like guiding the wind. And you'll notice there's a flag behind her, which is like a red flag, right? So this is during the Chibi, the Battle of Chibi, right, where basically the Cao, the Wei army, was fighting against the united army of Kongming, Shu, and also Wu, so like Sun Quan's army. So again, Sun Quan, Dongwu, this whole like other side of the three kingdoms that we haven't talked about yet. I'm really hoping they're not just like ignored, flat out ignored. I'm really hoping there are some characters from them as well, but so far we haven't seen it, so it is what it is. But Favorable Winds is because Zhuge Liang, for this battle, very famously borrowed the east wind, right? So during this battle, they were going to use fire to go defeat the Wei army, right? But the problem was during this time of the year, the winds always blow from west to east, not east to west, right? So this is kind of like, what the heck? How do you do this? And Zhuge Liang said, don't worry, I will perform a ceremony and I will borrow the east wind and then be able to basically like give you like a wind to go push against like, the boats to then like ignite Cao Cao's boats, right? Basically that's the stratagem. They're going to use fire, but for fire to work, they need wind. And so Zhuge Liang was able to get wind during a time when wind didn't blow or blew the opposite direction. So Favorable Winds is because the winds are now favorable and they can start the battle, because they were all waiting at this time. It was very tense because they were waiting for the winds to be right before they start the battle. Otherwise, the whole plan would not work. So it's really cool. Kongming is the person, of course, borrowing the wind, and this is Favorable Winds. Okay, so the last card we're going to talk about here on this episode is going to be the Imperial Seal. Very cool, right? So this conversation was something that I had with one of my friends from Taiwan, and it was just like a really interesting conversation about who this character is that's holding like the Imperial Seal. There are a couple guesses here, right? So if you're thinking about Three Kingdom lore, there are a couple guesses of the people who could be. Now, Imperial Seal is, of course, for the Emperor. So this card, obviously, very, very, very obvious guess is going to be that's the Emperor, right? So that could be the Emperor of Han is holding the Imperial Seal. That could be that character. The problem with that guess, though, is the Emperor of Han is kind of like weak during this time. And so a lot of like Sanguo, Three Kingdoms history doesn't really talk about him too much because he's kind of just a forgettable character, right? He's out in the background. He's really just somebody who's being utilized and used as a puppet to do their bidding, right? So whether it's Dong Zhuo or Cao Cao later, etc. So he's not really that interesting. Now, the more interesting guess is there are two other characters that this could be, maybe three. One is Yuan Shu. Yuan Shu is basically a character that was pretty early in the Three Kingdom lore. He owned a bunch of land that later got basically taken over by the Wu faction. But basically, he was somebody who really coveted power, right? Which I love this guess, because this guess is saying that this person, as you can see from the artwork even, there's a little bit of like this, like, like a Merlin feel, I think. When I look at this picture, I think of Merlin, that little evil smirk, like, oh yeah, I got the power, type of like feeling to it. So I feel like that's right. There's something about this feels like it's not a good character who now has the Imperial seal, right? That's how it kind of feels. The other guess is going to be about Dongwu. So the problem with, again, of course, this guess of Wu being the owner of the seal. So, okay, so first of all, it could be either the kind of like family head of the Wu family, which is Sun Jian. He's the father of Sun Quan and Sun Ce. So he was originally like one of the heroes that was battling Dong Zhuo in the beginning. And he was able to enter the capital city when Dong Zhuo left the city, vacated, to escape. And he did discover the Imperial seal, right? So he was the first person to get the Imperial seal after the emperor. However, he was also killed very early on. In fact, on his trip back home to Jiangdong, which is where the Wu people live, in the south, and basically let's just say like southeast China, he was ambushed and actually killed during the ambush. So he basically at that point, right, like he died. So it's maybe not as like important for a character. The other possibility is actually the elder son of Sun Jian. So when he died, Sun Jian had the Imperial seal. Now, Sun Jian had the Imperial seal for a long, long time while he served under who? Yuan Shu. Okay? So if you remember the first guest person, Yuan Shu, very likely it could be that Sun Ce gave this Imperial seal to Yuan Shu. So that's why Yuan Shu has it. So these three characters, other than the Emperor of Han, all could be possible owners of the Imperial seal. And as you guys can see, I'm a big fan of the Three Kingdoms lore, right? And so what I want to do is probably just do a couple more episodes where we each episode go over a couple cards just like we did for this episode, show you some of the references, show you some of the key parts of it. So far, what I've learned from this episode is that right now, what it looks like a lot of the stories and the story pieces of this of the cards we've seen is still pretty early in Sanguo. So I wonder if the Three Kingdom references in this set are going to be early Three Kingdoms, not like mid or late Three Kingdoms. So I guess we'll kind of see how that goes, right? But yeah, for next episode, it's pretty straightforward. I want to dive into a few more cards, and then again, we'll talk about a potential guess on who Jin is. That is very interesting. Now, very likely not true, but it's still very interesting to kind of dive deeper into that lore. So that's going to do for me for today. I'm Mark from Solar Games, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay classy.